People Not Titles podcast is brought to you by Landtrust Title Services, your partners for results.
Hey, 10 o'clock, we'll have agents filing in as we go, but out of respect for everyone's time, we want to get started. I want to just first say that we are recording this session. And so if you miss something or you want to get something, we'll send out a recording to all of our attendees. It'll also go out in our Landtrust newsletter, which goes out to really a community of thousands of agents. And so we really feel like this information is important. And so we are pleased today. I'll first introduce myself. My name is Steve Kemp. I'm a Senior Vice President at Landtrust Title Services. I have my colleague, Matt Lombardi, who is our Director of Brand Management and Customer Experience. And then I have my Senior Vice President and Senior Counsel, Bob Burns here, who's going to share the load. I'm especially pleased to have these two here, Mark Herrick and Nick Jaworski. They are real estate attorneys in the mix every day. And one of our kind of cornerstone philosophies are that, you know, the one way to mitigate risk, it's really at the top of the list, is find the right real estate attorney that you trust and that has a good relationship with a title company that they trust. And so, Mark, maybe I'll start with you and just maybe give a little introduction of yourself, and then we'll flip over to Nick for that introduction.
Sure, thanks. Mark Herrick, Angelina and Herrick. Our firm has been around for, over 30 years. I've been practicing for 25 years now in real estate only. That's all that I do. And I'm happy to be here and contribute in any way I can.
Thank you, Mark. Nick?
Yeah, Nick Jaworski. I'm from Voorn, Jaworski Preston. Our law firm doesn't have quite as many miles on it, but we've been around for 3. We split off of a firm out of Chicago back in 2022. Happy to be here as well, and looking forward to this.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. And we'll pull you guys in as we go along for your insights and anecdotes and tales from the front and whatnot. But to kick this off, I just want to say that many of you have heard that cybercrime is at an all-time high. Last year was at $12.5 billion. It goes up 20% a year. And real estate fraud has actually increased 4 times over the last 5 years. And I really believe that, it's one thing for us all to talk about, how you can make sure that your clients are safe. But if you're a realtor on this session today, I believe it would be a great opportunity for you to create a value proposition for yourself of security, of safety, of making sure that the transaction will get done and that you have steps and protocols and partners that make that happen. And I believe that's something that's going to resonate with all of your clients. So, I'll just plant that seed to say, as you're watching this, it's not just how do I protect myself and those kind of things, but it's actually how do I position myself in the market to be different than the rest when there's a lot of noise out there. There's a few deals going on right now. The market's tight. I believe this is something that'll resonate with people. So let's get into it. We're going to talk about the different types of fraud today. We're going to talk about the red flags of real estate fraud and how to stop it before it starts. We'll talk about some stories, some wins and some losses. And so that you might be able to relate to that and go, oh, wow, I should check that, or maybe I should tighten that up, or whatever it might be. And then we'll talk a little bit about how Landtrust is securing your transaction from listing to close. And you might say, oh, it's going to be a Landtrust pitch. Actually, we'll show you what we're doing. And this might be something that you look to your title company and go, okay, oh, wow, they're doing that too. I'm partnered with someone. Or you might go, wow, I need to make a change, or whatever it is. But the idea is that a title company should have a protocol and be able to explain how they're filling in the gaps with security and those kind of things. So that's what we're going to talk about. And then naturally, as we go along, Matt, if you wouldn't mind just monitoring the queue for us, that if someone has a question, we want to have this to be conversational and be in real time. And so just starting right here, Nick, What have you seen just in the market over the last, let's say, half a year, in terms of real estate fraud? Are you seeing it increasing? Or you see something, a conversation that's getting accentuated?
Yeah, generally speaking, I don't know that I've necessarily seen an increase as much as I consistently try to make our clients extraordinarily aware of, the potential problems and pitfalls. Obviously, cybersecurity is something that we're all cognizant of, moving forward, and what can happen when an email leaves my queue and goes over to our clients and vice versa. So, one of the things that I always kind of chuckle about is, and it's not really a laughing matter, but one of the things that I do is I try to actually impart on my clients the seriousness of being aware of the emails that you are receiving, what should and shouldn't be coming from my own office.
Yeah, so you're just making your own staff aware.
Yeah, make my staff aware, make obviously our clients, the
Yes.
people that are going to be receiving emails from us, what we would and would not send. And that's kind of one of the things that we do is make sure that our clients are directly contacting our title companies for, the instructions they should be receiving, as opposed to me stepping into the middle of that process.
Love it. Mark, how about you? What are you seeing in your world?
I personally haven't experienced a fraud situation, but I've heard of a few stories and scenarios. Fraudulent sellers have, I've even heard a horror story of just a few months ago of a deal that closed, unfortunately, with a fraudulent seller. It was an out-of-state seller in Georgia, presented the property, they ended up selling it, it closed. And the only reason it was ever discovered was the original owner went to make a mortgage payment and their mortgage was paid off at the closing. So
Wow.
they were like, I didn't pay that off, and that's how it was discovered. So that, you hear some stories like that, not a ton, but you do see it, which is why it's important to verify our sellers, and using new tools that you guys have is helpful. And then wire fraud is obviously the biggest thing that we
Yes.
have to be very careful about. And so on our end, it's always about educating our clients and the staff in our office about, this is a very email intensive job. Everybody now relies on just emailing everything all the time.
Yeah.
And so I, maybe I'm a little old school, but I tell people picking up a phone and verifying, hey, you sent me that email, or, this is a little fishy to me. It's not a bad thing. Our emails go out secure, but that doesn't mean the receiver has a secure email on their end that's
Absolutely.
not getting hacked. So, and people we carbon copy aren't getting hacked, and then they spoof the emails, etc. So those are the things you have to be careful about.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, let's get into this. So what is real estate fraud really? Yeah, it includes various deceptive practices, some of the things that you spoke about, guys, that involve property transactions, including mortgage fraud, where people are inflating values or misrepresenting financial information. That's not really what we're going to focus on today. Title fraud is illegally transferring property ownership by forging documents or using stolen identities. And then foreclosure fraud is exploiting homeowners facing foreclosure by offering fraudulent, rescue schemes. And there's, that going on. And then rental fraud, which is listing properties for rent that don't exist or aren't owned by the fraudster. I'm going to turn it over to Bob to talk a little bit about just the red flags of real estate fraud.
Thanks, Steve. So we have, over the last 6 months or a year, we've spoken with dozens of real estate agents and attorneys whose transactions have been affected by real estate fraud, either successful or unsuccessful fraud attempts. And we've compiled a list of the common themes that we're seeing, the red flags that we're seeing. So the first one is the seller, and a lot of these are specific to seller impersonation fraud, where somebody is pretending to be the seller and stepping into the shoes of the seller and trying to effectuate the entire transaction through to the closing. So one common trend we see is the seller only wants to communicate via email, sometimes by text as well. We're still seeing more email than text, though. They will not meet in person for obvious reasons.
Yeah, they're always out of town. They're always on business. They're always this, always that, busy, busy, busy.
Yeah, and one of the red flags that's related to that is, you know, a lot of people are out of town and, you know, on vacations and on business, so that's not unusual. A lot of the times we see they kind of lead with that. They say, "Oh, I'm not going to be here for the closing. I'm not." They make, you know, make it very clear up front of their unavailability, which is not the usual way things that work. So that's something to be aware of as well. They're often located in a different state or county, or at least say that they are. And then this is a theme we see through all types of fraud attempts is urgency and speed. So they want everyone to be making quick decisions without all of the information. So they often, in almost every case we've seen, they want to act quickly, and the urgency is their top priority. Even more important than maximizing their profit, they want it to be quick.
Yes.
Often they'll only accept a cash purchase. They don't want to deal with the additional scrutiny that's involved with a lender involved in the transaction. The seller is often listing vacant land. So vacant land is kind of the low-hanging fruit because nobody is there tending to the land, nobody is observing it. And there, no inspections, no walkthroughs, things like that. So it is just the easiest low-hanging fruit. But we're trying to prevent and monitor fraud for more than just vacant land, because the schemes are going to get more and more elaborate, and they're not going to stop. It's a very profitable, hundreds of thousands of dollars if one of these schemes works. So they're going to keep going. Vacant land is not where it's going to stop. And then the last one is, they will not provide a valid ID. We'll talk about some tools later that we have in place that, we've worked with Mark and Nick before on, where we can verify the ID of a seller using some of the tools that we have in place.
Absolutely.
And then here's some more red flags. These are a little more specific to the seller impersonation fraud. So like I mentioned, it's often vacant land where someone's impersonating the seller. It could be other non-owner occupied property. So it could be investment, vacation, or rental, where even though it's an existing structure, maybe there's nobody on site, or whoever is there is not, the owner. They don't know, they don't know what's going on with the property. It's unencumbered by a mortgage or lien, so it's free and clear. So this eliminates having to obtain a payoff statement from the payoff lender, which would involve, the criminal having more information about the seller, personal information about the seller, such as the account number, the account information for their existing mortgage, their social security number, things like that. As I mentioned before, the seller is willing to list below market value. We had one just last week where a real estate agent, through their attorney, called us and said, I listed this vacant lot a week ago, and I'm never going to meet this person. They're out of the state, and they wanted to reduce the listing price dramatically after a couple of days to get it done quickly. Raised some red flags along with some other communications that raised red flags, and we actually went through the process of verifying the ID, and they ghosted us. They never responded. They never responded back to the real estate agent.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to say, Bob, with this, with the seller not being available to be in person, in working with the attorney, they have to have a power of attorney at some point, right? And so that is one of the aspects and one of the backstops of the transaction. And maybe Nick, talk a little bit through that, your process, that, if an agent is working with you, this isn't going to happen because you're going to be, we have ways to partner with you in that. So.
Yeah, and one of the things that we obviously do is, we'll have people come into our office to pre-sign documents and to make sure that we're getting their ID when they come in here, verifying who they are. I actually, now that you guys got into this a little bit further, I had a situation probably about 5 years ago where our listing agent listed a property, and the buyer came through and wanted to wire the earnest money directly to the title company before it killed the transaction, and asked for a fresh check back. In that instance, obviously this is somebody outside of our control. It's not even a client. that is trying to perpetrate this fraud and actually get money back before it clears. And that's how they were trying to make their money on the actual transaction.
So they're not involved in the transaction at all. They
Yeah.
wire money, in, and then they ask for it back in the form of a check or whatever. And,
Right.
all of a sudden it's where's Waldo and where's the money?
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the biggest thing is, obviously, our notary process is very important, making sure that we're verifying who we're actually with. And that goes a long way to make sure that we're not catching, the out of state instances where somebody just can't possibly be bothered to come to Illinois to look at documents, assigned documents, et cetera.
Absolutely. That's great. Okay. Continuing, Bob, here. Yeah, that's the one we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but the final one is the seller wants to use their own notary.
Yeah, and that one is for all the seller impersonation frauds, that's almost a given that they're not going to, show up at their attorney's office or the title company office, that they're going to, for whatever reason, they're going to say that they cannot meet with an attorney that is under the attorney's control or the title company's control. So that is, that's definitely a common theme and a major red flag.
Mark, how often does that happen? Where someone's traveling, I mean, it's legitimate a lot of times, right? They can't come into the office, right?
It happens often, actually.
Yeah.
It's very common, especially when you're representing sellers, because a lot of times we're representing sellers who are moving out of state.
Mhm.
So a lot of times they've already moved, or they're gone. They're in Florida, Georgia, wherever the case may be, and they're not going to fly back to Illinois just to have a 5-minute appointment to sign their closing docs. That's
Especially
just
in the
not
information age where everyone's doing everything online, right?
correct. And the problem that we run into, and I'm sure Nick runs into it all the time too, everything now is so, they DocuSign all their contracts. They DocuSign, everything's electronic. Just even local people, sometimes to get them to come in just to sign docs, they're like, well, why can't I just DocuSign the deed? And, everybody just wants to do everything electronically now. So, when we have the out-of-state scenario, one of the nice things that you guys offer that we can use is the remote online notary.
Yes.
Which, there's a fee associated with that, and we tell them there's a fee, but
Mhm.
it's, requires them to have a US phone, computer. They have to have their IDs. There's a whole verification process for that remote online notary for those people who aren't local. And then sometimes, yeah, we have to say, all right, you're gonna have to go to your local bank or wherever to a notary to have the docs notarized, because I mean, sometimes you just don't have another option but to do that. It's very common.
Yeah. Nick, any commentary on that at all?
Yeah, I guess the upside of Mark's scenario is that when people do move, and it happens quite frequently that they're leaving town before we close or leaving town before they have the opportunity to come in for that 5-minute signing appointment. At the very least, our realtors have had contact with these people in person.
Mhm.
And we can also talk to our realtors and say, hey, you guys have met with these people, they were in the house, et cetera, et cetera. So you get a little bit more comfortability with, at least somebody having some human contact with these people.
Absolutely. And, and Nick, and that's where I think it really is important. Realtors, a partnership with an attorney so that you have a cadence of communication. You have to build that trust. All of a sudden that situation is going to be different,
Yeah.
And so where you're going to be able to work together to make sure that, no one's getting scammed here. That's great. Okay, Bob, let's talk about the things that you can do for seller impersonation fraud if you believe that you're dealing with someone who's a fraudster.
Yeah, the first thing is to notify your managing broker, and if you're working with an attorney at that point, with the attorney as well. And then the second step would be to contact the true owner at a verifiable mailing address, email address, telephone number. sometimes it's as easy as a Google search to, gain confidence that you're dealing with the right person. If that's not working, and you can always contact us, and we have access to a couple of databases, one being the Closing Lock platform, where we can send out communication to the seller or the purported seller, and they go through a process where they scan their ID. Sometimes they're required to take a selfie. It depends on the situation, but Closing Lock helps us verify their identity, and we also have access to a database that insurance companies who are trying to prevent fraud have access to verify identities as well. So there's kind of more than one way to do it. So those are the things I would do to verify somebody's identity if you're not.
Yeah. And in our experience, if people are sincere, they have no problem going through the steps to make sure that we have a secure transaction. It's a big transaction. There's a lot of money involved. They will take the extra steps. If people start getting spooked, if people start acting weird, then, that's already another red flag for this. And believe it or not, we've even had fraudsters that have gone through this process and tried to scam their way through it. They don't remember what car they drove. They don't have the right ID. They don't have a phone, whatever. They're on an island, whatever the excuses are. But pretty soon you start to corner them and realize, wow, I'm dealing with a fraudster. And, for a lot of real estate agents, you're taught that, boy, if you do the right things and you market all this, one day someone's going to call you out of the blue and you're going to get pennies from heaven. And that's the alluring thing to this. It's like, wow, my luck. This person wants to sell. They want to, they want a cash deal. They want to close quick. All my work is paying off. So everything in you wants to believe that it's a good deal, and we've seen that before, haven't we, guys? Nick and Mark?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Steve, what I would like to just interject here is for the realtors on this Zoom is you are the first line of defense in a lot of preventing this fraud. And if your intuition is this doesn't feel right, it probably is not right, and take those steps to sort of mitigate that risk.
Absolutely. So, I was thinking, we had this big list of stuff of like, what could a person do to minimize fraud? I honestly believe if you have the right real estate attorney, you can stop this right at the gate because of the kind of two-step verification of you, and you have them DocuSign the listing agreement or whatever it is. But then you have your attorney partner that has this power of attorney process that if they're tight on it and right on it, it's going to stop right there. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys.
Oh, absolutely.
Agreed.
Okay. And, you be on the lookout, yourself and your client be on the lookout for fraud. And that's another thing, if you're working with, or if you let that attorney piece of it get away where it's like, oh, my cousin Vinny got me out of a traffic jam, back a DUI, and I'm going to use him for this transaction. People do that sometimes because they have family or whatever it is, or another scenario where they have a different attorney. If you can coach your client and have that conversation with them up front to say, hey, listen, I work with a real estate attorney that is doing real estate transactions every day. They're in the mix. They're watching for it. That makes a huge difference. So you be on the lookout for fraud. And both Nick and Mark are actually preparing the client for it. Hey, there are going to be some extra steps. There might be a delay in the funding, whatever it is, but it's only because each point of the transaction, people are taking their time to do their job to vet, to make sure that the money is going to wind up in the right spot. Do not click on links unless you're 100% sure they're safe. It's better to go to the institution that sent, to Nick's point where he said or was it Mark, pick up the phone? Yeah, well, either way. Yeah, Mark said pick up the phone. Yep, a good old-fashioned phone call, can clear up a lot of different communication. And be extra vigilant on the email address spelling. And if someone else inserts themselves into the email conversation, beware of the spoofed emails. That is one thing. You can have all the steps in the world, but a lot of these people are watching the communication until it's time for that critical email to go out. And then boom, they're sending it out saying, oh, by the way, new payoff, new this, new that, send it here. We see that all the time. and then closing lock to ensure the ID of the sellers. So you know what, we're just going to talk about a couple of stories, and in these stories, you might find you know, something, a scenario for yourself, either in the past or in the future. But I could say, first off, for me, I'll sink this one home. I had I had a mortgage company in from 96 to 2008, and I had my own title agency. And one day I came in on a Monday morning, and 180 grand was gone out of our escrow account. And I was like, wow, like what happened? Well, it came to find out that my operations person was fell to a phishing scheme, and that was a much different era. And I don't think that there's no one giving out their bank details these days, but back then it was fairly fresh and new. But one thing I can tell you is, once the button's pushed and the money is gone, it is really, really hard to get it back. You know, out of the 180 grand, I got 60 grand of it back, but 120 was gone. I went to the Cleveland Federal Reserve. I went everywhere, and they're basically like, sorry, dude, you know, it's gone. Once it's gone, it's gone. The toothpaste is out of the tube, and it never can be put back in. So that's the first thing, is that always be thinking about, you know, this is money that is, you know, if it goes to the wrong place, it is really difficult to get back.
And Steve, one thing on that, if you're ever working with a client who believes they've been fallen victim to a scheme like this, a wire fraud scheme, the very first thing, before anyone else gets a phone call, the very first thing that they need to do is call the fraud department of their bank and the fraud department of the bank that received the wire. That's before anything, before law enforcement or anything else. Those two phone calls, especially the one to the fraud department of their bank, which are open 24/7. They you know, have to Google the number probably, but that is the phone call that will save the money.
Yeah,
And
if it's savable.
it's savable. If it's ever going to be savable, it's by that phone call.
Yes.
And
then-
Steve, I have a question from one of our participants.
Yes.
And so without getting into too many legal details, what steps, and I think this is a good place to answer this, what steps and details does a seller have if they've been defrauded? And are the legitimate owners able to get the property back? And what kind of liability is there for brokers, attorneys who were working in good faith but were frauded as well?
Great question. Bob, why don't you cover that?
Yeah, so there
And
is
we'll have Nick and Mark comment accordingly.
forgery and fraud is covered if it was insured, if it ran through a title company and you know, an attorney agent like Nick or Mark, it is insured under the buyer's insurance policy. So what would happen is the seller, the true owner rather, would file a lawsuit to basically set that sale aside, to void it, and to vest title back into the true owner of the property. And the title insurance underwriter, the insurer of that title insurance policy, would make the payment to the insured buyer. So the money that they are out would be paid by the title insurance company. This is if everything was insured, if everything ran through a title company, was closed.
Hey, thanks for listening to the People Not Titles podcast. We are brought to you by our great sponsors, Landtrust Title Services, your partners for results.
And then there would be potential liability if the real estate agent, if the attorney, if the title agency, title company made mistakes, failed to do their due diligence. So there is potential liability on their part, which is why, you know, attorneys like Mark and Nick are taking such steps to prevent fraud, why Landtrust has as well, because at the best case scenario is being tied up in court. So obviously the worst case scenario is worse than that.
Yeah, and you can imagine someone buys vacant land and no one finds out for 18 months, and now you've built a home on it. And all of that has to be, settled. And so it gets really sticky. And if you're on any side of the transaction, somehow you're looped in, and whether it be financially or just from a reputation standpoint, it just sullies you in a way that you don't want. And I think that that's why Mark and Nick, we talk about that the key is really the power of attorney, and working with an attorney that is not like trying to do things just to get it done, but really trying to do it so that everyone's protected and have a protocol in place that's common, that they work with every day. Oh, it's this scenario, we're going to do remote online notary, or we'll send the notary service there, or whatever it is that we're going to control. Great. Bob, do you have any other stories that, I mean, I know we're keeping track now of how many transactions we're stopping from fraud a month, and then how much money is actually being saved. But Bob, maybe you could just share a couple other things that have happened that that people might be able to relate to so they can protect themselves.
Yeah, I mean, we've been tracking in the last 6 months. It looks like we've had 26 some level of fraud attempt on transactions that we've been involved in, and 13 of those have been seller impersonation type fraud, where somebody is claimed to be the owner of the property, and actually 9 of them have been in attempts to introduce fraudulent wire instructions into the transaction, and that's been almost exclusively through email. So, for example, and this was a few months ago, we had a situation where an agent's email got hacked at some point, and the day before the closing, the criminal sent an email that came from the agent's email account to the buyer saying, oh, the wire needs to go out by this afternoon, otherwise we're going to have to push the closing date. So the buyer sent a $600,000 wire, and it was gone. And we got a phone call. Everybody obviously was in a panic. And fortunately, and this, I don't think I've ever seen this before, but I'll give a shout out to BMO Harris Bank. They flagged it because of the high dollar amount, and the receiving account was recently opened. So they put a freeze on it, and the buyers were actually able to get their money back. I thought, you can put the odds of that happening are probably, less than 1%. So that was, that ended up being a good story, and no one was harmed. We've also had, just in the last few months alone, we've had probably a half a dozen situations where we received a phone call from an attorney or an agent, and they just had a suspicion that maybe something was not right. They weren't working with the true owner of the property. And we have sent closing lock verifications to them, which sends an email to them. They have to scan their ID. They, in some cases, have to take a selfie of themselves. We have the ability to have them take answer knowledge-based questions, like, where did you live at any of these addresses in the past 20 years? Did you own this type of car? Those types of things. So we've had 6 just in the last couple of months where we've gone through that process, and the person either, you mentioned Steve, or sometimes they go for it, and even though they're getting this test, they still try to pass it, which doesn't work, or they have just stopped communicating with the agent or the attorney or us, and realize that they're just going to try a different property and try it somewhere else. So those are just some recent examples that we've had.
Yep. Bob, I want to interject here. Carmen, one of our top salespeople, is on the Zoom, and she just wanted to say there was another case where PNC Bank flagged a $37,000 wire transfer that someone was trying to say. And so banks may be on more of a higher alert than we think. And I think they're being more, aware of these types of things.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And to Bob's point, that as soon as like one barrier is set up, it's kind of like the rats going through the maze. They take a different route than to go to the cheese, and so they'll just take the knowledge that is out there and what the remedies that we have, and they'll try to go a different way, or they will start finding soft spots, people that are like we were talking about, people who aren't in the real estate law business regularly. That would be a soft spot in my mind. Or maybe there's an agency, a small title agency, and no disrespect to any of that, that can't afford the security protocols or can't take the steps. All of a sudden, that becomes another soft spot. So all of these partners in your transaction become vital so that you can deliver the customer experience that they expect. So, okay, anyone else want to chip in on this tales from the front? Okay. Let's continue. Yep, well, vacant land, we got all that. Okay, great. So let's just talk about Landtrust and what we're doing. And you know, honestly, we're not going to talk so much about what Landtrust is doing, but through this, we're going to talk about what are the gaps in a real estate transaction that have potential for fraud. So if you look, you have the listing agreement side. And the first thing is, with your listing agreement signed, does the property have a clean title? And Landtrust offers a lookup, but you could do a quick search to see, does it have a clean title? Or are there things that could hinder or hamper that person's ability to sell? And Mark, maybe you could take this. What could come up at this point in time? I know it's not like super critical, but there are things that could come up that will all of a sudden you'll realize I can't sell this owner's property.
Well, you know, the property profiles, those pre-searches are
Yeah.
really helpful. Sometimes you see that there's a break in the chain of title. And that is usually a red flag. You know, two people own the property together. Now it's just in one, or it's changed ownership through a quitclaim deed, and we were trying to figure out, well, who was that? Where did that transfer occur? Usually if we see some sort of a break in that chain of title, that can be a red flag. And then you're looking for liens that are unusual, UCC filings or things that
Tax liens.
that kind of a property are not normal or customary. And so it'll raise some red flags. You start questioning your seller, you know, are you aware of this lien? What's this from? That sort of thing. Those are the things that usually can come up and raise some red flags that we investigate a lot of times before you've even put the house on the market or found a buyer.
Absolutely. And so there it is. That's the listing agreement. Then at the attorney review time, and the time the title order is placed, that's when you can verify, am I working with the right, the true owner and the right seller? And this may not be fraudulent, Nick. This could be there, you know, in a state scenario where the person representing everything is not the actual person that has control of the situation.
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head for me because I deal with that more often than not. We do a lot of estate sales, and we deal with a lot of, you know, corporate fiduciaries, number one, but number two, we deal with a lot of out of state, you know, successor trustees, trying to figure out and verify who those people are and make sure that that is absolutely accurate becomes a little bit more of a trick shot. To Mark's point, being on the phone with people a lot helps. You know, like we talked about, people that are in that position as successor trustees, but they're out there, you know, fraudulently doing it, they're not going to pick the phone up. They are certainly not going to want to push anything into probate. You know, that would be, you know, creating more points of contact. And, you know, in those senses, I just don't see them doing stuff like that. But you know, it is obviously something that we constantly have to be aware of because a lot of, you know, successor trustees, a lot of the people that take over these estates, they're not living in Illinois, and they become a little bit less likely to have, you know, full on in-person meetings with realtors.
Yes, absolutely. And Bob, maybe you could talk just briefly about the steps that we're taking to verify every single seller. So if there's a deal that comes through Landtrust, every single seller will be verified no matter what.
Yeah, so every seller, regardless, we made the decision. I think there's a lot of companies out there that have steps in place for vacant land. So we made the decision to take it beyond that, and every single purchase transaction that we close, we're verifying the identity of the seller. There's a higher level of scrutiny if the property is not owner occupied and does not have a mortgage. So we talked about that in the red flags, that those are kind of the low hanging fruit for the criminals. So we do take extra steps, but for every single transaction, we're verifying the seller through their phone number that they are working with, through their email address. And like I said, we have the knowledge-based questions that we can generate for them. So we have formed a department, an escrow security team that has several full-time employees whose only job is to verify the identity and then make sure that these next 3 steps that we're talking about are all verified and buttoned down.
Yeah, excellent, Bob. And and this is kind of more forward-looking in the sense of, okay, we know where the fraudsters are, but they're going to move. They're going to up their game. They're going to start getting fake IDs. They're going to do whatever it takes to present themselves in a way to get that money, and we want to stay ahead of that. So just know that if a file comes through Nick or Mark and is coming to Landtrust, that we are going to make sure, no matter what, that we have verified that seller. And that just gives everyone a great peace of mind, including the seller, so they know that their property won't be sold out from underneath them, and that there is security protocols in place. Okay, then we have the title search and exam, and then we have this time of payoff. And are you sure the payoff information is correct? And we take steps to do the payoff verification through closing lock. So, Mark, just talk a little bit maybe about this step here when you guys are ordering the payoff and how that's done, and what this means to people.
So, I think every office handles this differently, probably, but for our office, when we get a file in from a seller, we send out a form, a link where they have to input a bunch of information, which includes their name, social security number, their banks, who their banks are, the account numbers, information such as that. We're able to take that information and verify that with our title commitment. The banks match up, the account, etc. We will then reach out and order a payoff to satisfy that loan based on the information that's been provided to us. If somebody's not willing to give us that information, we'll have them go through title, closing lock services, verifying their information. Typically for us, we are not comfortable accepting a payoff from somebody we don't know that necessarily. We want that payoff to come directly from the bank institution to our office. We're not very comfortable with the client saying like, oh, I'll get you the payoff and give it to you. We would rather order it ourselves and have that control. Not everyone practices that way. I know that. But for us, we want that information directly from the bank to our office, so we can confirm the doc numbers match with the title commitment, the payoffs amount are in line with how much they borrowed initially. So that's how we handle it.
Great. Nick, maybe just address really quick, what happens if the payoff is fraudulent and it goes to the wrong place?
Fortunately, I haven't had that happen,
Yeah.
which is a good thing. Obviously, to some of Mark's points there, there are checkpoints to make sure that things line up the way that they're supposed to, whether it be, loan numbers or the institutions that are involved in it, et cetera. One of the things that I try to work with my clients through the process is I actually do it a little differently than Mark does. I'll have my clients, order payoffs. I still use a fax machine, believe it or not. And that fax machine is useful. Knowing that on the back end too, the title company is also going to have my back and take a look at, everything as well. So we're verifying on the front end before we turn that over to the next step.
Awesome. And no matter what happens in that scenario, that we at Landtrust we are verifying every single payoff through closing lock to make sure that there's a stopgap there. Anything you want to say about that, Bob?
Yeah, so what we're doing when we receive a payoff, and not every attorney has the processes that Mark and Nick do in place. I wish they did, but so every payoff that we receive, we run it through closing lock, and that allows us to know that that account that we're going to be sending the payoff funds to has been used routinely to receive payoffs for that institution. So we know it's a good payoff account. If it's a smaller lending institution or sometimes local credit unions, things like that, they're not in that database. So we, that escrow security team that I mentioned, puts a call in to the payoff lender. 9 times out of 10, they have to involve the seller. So they have to, a lot of times we ask the seller to join us on that phone call, and we verify the payoff over the phone if we can't do it through closing lock.
Mm-hmm. Oh, awesome. Matt, we have a question.
We got a few questions, but I'm gonna wait until we're done.
Oh, okay. We'll
bring those
address
up.
those questions. Hang tight. Okay, so if you've ever gone down the river, whitewater rafting, this is the point where everyone has to kind of buckle in and make sure their helmets on and make sure they stay in the raft here, where you now have closing scheduled, and now you're starting to see people wanting to send and receive wires. How do your seller want their proceeds sent? Mark, are there any specific protocols that you guys have for this?
Yeah, so wire is obviously the biggest fear
Yep.
we all have in the
Softest
industry.
point.
Every attorney I know that does real estate, I'll qualify that, real
Yeah.
estate attorneys, all in some way, shape, or form, either on their email signature lines, through their correspondence, they always advise all of their clients, beware of wire fraud. We will not email you wiring instructions. If you receive them, you should verbally call to verify those instructions with the title company to receive them. It is, we even link an old ABC7 news story about fraud to our emails that we send. Watch this video. Are we trying to scare our people? Yes, we are. And I tell them, yes, we're trying to make you nervous about sending that wire so that you go through all the necessary steps to verify it, because the last thing we want is for you to send a wire and then it's gone and you don't get to buy your house. And Nick has heard stories. We all have stories. I have a story, where a wire fraud was sent to my client, thankfully caught by the bank. We all have those stories. And so we try to tell people, be very diligent. Don't accept an email as a wire instruction and just send it without verbally verifying where it's going.
Awesome. Nick, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I completely agree with Mark. I also intentionally try to impart on my clients that it's a scary process and they need to absolutely follow the correct steps. So I could not agree with you more, Mark. On the other side of things, call me old fashioned, but if we can get away with a paper check, we're going to use a paper check. If it's under 50 grand, please go to your bank and get a cashier's check. If it is proceeds that we're sending to you, if you're comfortable coming to get the check, or if you're comfortable with the overnight mail, I am far more comfortable in those scenarios than I am in the wiring scenario, simply because we have all heard the horror stories and seen what can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Bob, if you want to talk just about, kind of wrapping up on wires, how Closing Lock supports this kind of secure effort, and then what is the benefit to the agent and their clients?
Yeah, so for wiring proceeds to the seller, Closing Lock has 2 options. One is they receive a secure email or text, and the seller, once they verify their information and their phone number and everything else, the seller can either link directly to their bank account using Plaid, which I think probably a lot of people have used something similar, where it's a portal that links directly to the bank account where they don't have to type in the information. Or they can free type in their bank account information. It's securely transmitted to us. And if they're doing that free typing, they also have to verify their identity at that point as well. So that's for seller proceeds. For the buyer's cash to close wire, we encourage people to call us directly, and we have that escrow security staff who sends them a secure email with our wire instructions using Closing Lock, along with instructions that say these will never change. Do not accept any other wire instructions other than these. And then we actually encourage them to call us back after they receive them. So we'd like to have 2 phone calls with the buyers in that case. And what the benefit is other than, I think, peace of mind, is for the three things that we just talked about, verifying payoff account information, and then seller proceeds, wire information, and then buyer's cash to close. If the buyer or seller uses Closing Lock and goes through the steps that they're prompted to go through and follows the instructions that Closing Lock provides, then those funds are protected up to $2.5 million. So there's an insurance policy that Closing Lock provides that our legal team has reviewed and worked with Closing Lock on this. And that policy, that protection essentially extends down to the consumer. It's the title, it's Landtrust would be protected, the attorneys are protected, the real estate agents are protected, and the consumers are protected by that policy, because it's really the funds that are protected up to $2.5 million.
Great, thank you, Bob. And there's a lot more information on Closing Lock that you can get from one of our title reps, which we'll talk about at the end here. But okay, so that's a transaction. Then you go to the smooth closing and recording and policy issuance, and everyone's happy. So here's our sales title team. I just want to introduce to you Tony Zielinski is our VP of Sales, Carmen Carbonara, Director of Sales, Denise Hellstrom, Senior Account Exec, Anya is our Executive Account Manager, Rosa, Account Executive, Barb is our Account Executive, and then we have Tracy, our newest, is our Director of Sales in Chicago. So we have a really robust team of folks on the ground. And Bob mentioned too that we have a security response team. Everyone knows something happens. Here's the protocol. Here's what we do. We're not going to be guessing. There's a strict and there's a visionary plan for us to get the money back quickly, but most importantly, to stop it from going anywhere it shouldn't. All right, Matt, let's hit these questions. If anyone has any others, and then we'll wrap this thing up.
Yeah, so one is not a question. It was just a comment that I think is very valuable to everybody on the Zoom, which is one of our attendees has had several out-of-state buyers only want to communicate through WhatsApp, which I think would be another good red flag if clients only want to communicate through that app. So thank you for sharing that. And there's another good one, and I'm going to pose this to the panel, which is, can or does AI help scammers in phone calls that are being used to verify wire information? With AI, have you guys experienced that? People spoofing voices to get that? And if it is, anything?
I think, so I might just comment on that, being someone who's into the AI scene, is that, I've heard that AI, if you're a good person, AI will provide more energy, power, and ability for you to be good. And if you are a person that is a thief or a dark-hearted, it will give you more ability to exercise that aspect of it as well. So I would only say that for a thief, AI is only going to help them get more sophisticated in it. I don't know if anyone else has any, Bob, if you have any commentary on that.
Yeah, and one thing that we have seen is for years and years, there were common themes to fraudulent emails. One famous one is the word kindly was used, almost in every fraudulent email for years. You saw the word kindly for whatever reason. And a lot of times the punctuation was off, the grammar was off, things like that. And a lot of those emails are more sophisticated and cleaner and more, grammatically correct, because the thieves are using AI to generate those emails.
Wow. So
and
there
then
you go.
The second one is we haven't personally experienced anything with the voice, generating the voice, but we've heard stories around the country of that happening as well. But yeah, the emails have gotten remarkably better because of AI.
Okay. Matt, another question?
Not another question, but yeah, a question, and this is more for Mark and Nick. Are either of you have any specialty or background in working with the Foreign Investment and Real Estate Property Tax Act?
Wonderful FERPTA.
Yeah, FERPTA. Go ahead, Mark.
FERPTA is one of those things, not a lot of people know a lot about it, to be very frank. And I say that because I literally just last week ran into a FERPTA problem on a transaction at the closing table. And I called a fellow attorney who I know knows FERPTA like the back of their hand, better than I do. And so I was able to get a lot more information. So have I dealt with FERPTA? Yes, I've had foreign investor clients who we've had to do holdbacks. We have to reach out to a company that specializes in that, FERPTA companies that actually hold the money back for those transactions. So I've had to do that. The recent one I had, the clients were technically not citizens. They didn't have a green card, but we had to find ways around FERPTA, which there's a residency requirement, and you do these. It was very complicated. Thankfully, I reached out to somebody who knew more than I did. But yeah, I think we all have a little experience with FERPTA, but I don't know that anyone has a ton. Nick may have more than I do, but
I did I've been practicing real estate for about 10 years. I've had one client that was a foreign investor in real estate, and we did a holdback. Title companies have affiliated companies that they work with that can help you through the process and put together the necessary information for that holdback. I can't tell you that my client was terribly thrilled about it, but the other side of it is why the act is there and what would happen to a buyer in the event that it should have been held back and now capital gains aren't being paid. So it's all for a reason. It's just it doesn't happen a ton. And one of the things that I as a practitioner that I do for my buyers is make sure that I'm getting a signed FERPTA from the seller at the closing table to verify the fact that they are at least have a social security or tax ID number, so we don't have to necessarily worry about the implications of FERPTA.
Bob, do you have any commentary on that?
Yeah, I think they hit it on the head. A lot of title companies work with, there's companies who are dedicated to nothing other than FERPTA withholding. It is an obligation of the buyer to make sure the proper amount is withheld, which is maybe not intuitive all the time, but so we'll work with the buyer and the buyer's attorney as a courtesy, maybe to send a check in, but we refer to buyers to FERPTA Solutions is one. There's other companies that do nothing other than FERPTA withholding.
Great. So we can take that matter offline if you'd like. Any other questions, Matt?
No.
Okay. Well, I just want to say, Mark and Nick, I want to thank you for taking the time investing with us to share your expertise. If you're an agent out there and you are looking for a quality attorney, you've met two of them today, and Mark Herrick and Nick Jaworski. So thank you. And we thank you for your business at Landtrust. Your trust you put in us, we don't take lightly. And we're taking every step possible to make sure that the transaction is sound and that you are insured as well. Bob, thank you too. And Matt, you're always a pleasure to deal with. So have a nice day, everyone.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, thanks for listening to the People Not Titles podcast. We are proudly sponsored by Landtrust Title Services. If you enjoyed the podcast, please hit the like button, please subscribe, and we'd love it if you'd share our podcast with your friends. Thanks a lot.